अंग्रेज़ों को ये कहीं ना कहीं ये लगने लगा था आफ्टर द सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर और ड्यूरिंग दैट टाइम कि अब हमको हिंदुस्तान को तो आज़ादी देनी ही पड़ेगी. दैट व्हाई इज़ इट सो इम्पॉर्टेंट टू फेस योर ट्रॉमा एंड टू कम आउट ऑफ इट.
तभी गुजरात राइट्स हुए थे तो उन्होंने कहा क्या आप हमारे जो है वी वांट टू गिव समवन द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑफ वर्किंग विद द ट्रॉमा ऑफ द पीपल अफेक्टेड. यू नो व्हाई इज हिंदू ट्रॉमा बीइंग सप्रेस्ड. Talk about the trauma undergone by Muslims, not undergone by Hindus. एक इंसिडेंट बहुत उस वक्त रिपोर्ट हुआ था कि a number of women have been sexually assaulted. तो जब हमने उनसे बात की तो पता चला कि there was no mass sexual assault at all. जो 58 लोग जो ट्रेन में जो who were burnt alive, जब मैंने उनके बारे में बात करना चाहा तो NHRC में भी इसमें भी उन्होंने कहा कि नहीं इसके बारे में बात मत कीजिए. बट नथिंग ऑफ दैट काइंड विच द मीडिया हैड ब्लोन इट अप टू बी. तो जब मैंने इसके बारे में भी बताया कि ऐसा नहीं हुआ था, सो आई वॉज टोल्ड टू बी यू नो कीप इट शट फाउंड. एंड गांधी जी यू नो he was very clear about his image. वो ऐसा कोई भी चीज़ नहीं करना चाहते थे जिससे मुस्लिम्स को धक्का लगे. So unfortunately that did not continue itself with the coming of you know independence, because Nehru probably was very much of a secular and you know kind of person who did not want this aspect of Hindu consciousness and development to take place. Nothing happened after 47, primarily because one of the reasons was leadership. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the leadership went into the hands of a person who was not very much rooted in the soil of India, and that colonial mindset has ruled India.
This is a major shift. Now, so this is a little more nuanced question that I'm trying to ask you.
Mr. Modi's personality is completely different in many ways from the personalities of the older prime ministers. The Indian people saw in him someone who's a savior. He came as a savior in 2014, and that way he was both a product of the times, and the times are also being shaped by him.
So I welcome Dr. Rajat Mitra, who is a psychologist. I've been a great admirer of his work, और मैं सुनता रहा हूँ इनको YouTube पे. और इन्होंने एक किताब लिखी है, बहुत महत्वपूर्ण किताब है तो नॉवल, पर उसमें एक करेंट टॉपिक को इन्होंने लिया है जो कश्मीरी लोगों के साथ जो ट्रॉमा से वो गुजरे हैं और जो वहाँ के हालात हैं उसको लेकर, द इनफिडल नेक्स्ट डोर. और अभी ये दूसरे नावल पे काम कर रहे हैं जो अंग्रेज़ी शासन के दौरान यहाँ पे जो समस्याएं आई उसको लेकर के. डॉक्टर मित्रा ने इंडिविजुअल लेवल पे ट्रॉमा पे और कलेक्टिव ट्रॉमा पे बहुत काम किया है, बरसों से उनका काम रहा है. अभी कल ही हम लोगों ने इनका एक पब्लिक लेक्चर आयोजित किया देहरादून में, जो बहुत अच्छा उसका रिस्पॉन्स रहा. तो मैंने सोचा इस मौके का फ़ायदा उठाया जाए और आपसे कुछ लंबी बात की जाए. नमस्कार, वेलकम. तो डॉक्टर मित्रा, मैं यहाँ से शुरू करना चाहता हूँ कि आप अपनी जर्नी, ये जो साइकोलॉजी की और फिर आप ट्रॉमा के विषय में इसमें आपने एंटर किया, ये इसकी थोड़ी सी संक्षेप में इस यात्रा को बताएं.
मैं मनोविज्ञान में आया क्योंकि मेरे एक मित्र थे, वो उनके पेरेंट्स जो थे दोनों साइकोलॉजिस्ट थे. तो उनके घर में जो मेंटली डिस्टर्ब्ड लोग होते थे वो अक्सर आते थे. तो मेरे ऊपर कई बार उनकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी पड़ती थी कि जैसे किसी ने अच्छा बिहेव किया है तो उसको दिल्ली के दीप पॉल्स में वहाँ पे आइसक्रीम के लिए ले जाओ. तो उस वक्त तक मुझे मनोविज्ञान के बारे में ख़ास जानकारी नहीं थी. तो जब जानकारी हुई तो मेरी इसमें दिलचस्पी बढ़ी और इसमें मैंने अपना करियर बनाने का निश्चय किया. तो मेरा पहला पड़ाव जो था वो मानसिक रूप से जो डिस्टर्ब्ड लोग थे, यंग एडल्ट्स, उनके साथ था. तो और जो मेरी ट्रेनिंग थी, जो मेरा डॉक्टरेट था, वो ग्रीफ में था, शोक में, ग्रीफ प्रोसेस, ग्रीफ एंड ट्रॉमा। तो इन दोनों विषयों पे मैं काम कर रहा था इस इंस्टीट्यूशन में। तो एक दिन अचानक जो है मेरी मुलाकात जो है डॉक्टर किरण बेदी से हुई। उन्होंने मेरा लेक्चर सुना और उन्होंने तभी जो है दिल्ली के तिहाड़ जेल में हेड का पोस्ट लिया था। तो उन्होंने कहा कि दिल्ली में जो है ये जो मेरे वार्ड्स हैं वहाँ पे वायलेंस बहुत है, तो क्या आप आके वायलेंस रिडक्शन प्रोग्राम एक शुरू करना चाहेंगे प्रिजन्स में। तो प्रिजन्स में मेरी शुरुआत ग्रीफ से, वायलेंस से वहाँ से हुई। और मैंने शुरू में एक ही वार्ड में काम करना शुरू किया, लेकिन जैसा हुआ कि मेरी नीड, शायद हमारे काम की नीड, और हमारा एक टीम था, डॉक्टर सेठी, मैं और कई लोग थे। मेरा ख़ास तौर से काम जो है था वो शोक पे था। इंसान को जब शोक होता है तो वो कैसे उससे उभरता है, और कैदियों में ये बहुत होता था। तो जब ये देखा कि जब हमने उनको कोई एक्सरसाइजेस दिए जिससे वो शोक के थ्रू निकल सकते थे, तो पूरे वार्ड का जो माहौल था वो बदल गया। एक आपको किस्से से मैं वो करना चाहता हूँ कि हमने सोचा कि जब हमने वार्ड में काम करना शुरू किया, 300 लोग थे, तो हमने सोचा कि हमारा यार्ड स्टिक क्या होगा कि हम सक्सीड हो रहे हैं। तो वहाँ पे जो हमारे वार्ड के हेड थे उन्होंने कहा, सर अगर आप सक्सीड हो रहे हैं तो वार्ड का बल्ब जो है वो नहीं टूटेगा, क्योंकि रोज़ रात को बल्ब टूटता है नेफेरियस एक्टिविटीज़ के लिए। तो अगर आपका काम, आप सफल हो रहे हैं, तो अगर बल्ब ये नहीं टूटता है तो इसका मतलब है कि। तो 6 महीने बाद मुझे किरण बेदी के ऑफिस से फ़ोन आया, रजत देयर इज़ गुड न्यूज़, द बल्ब हैज़ रिमेन्ड इंटैक्ट फॉर 1 वीक। तो उन्होंने बोला क्या कर रहे हो, मैंने कहा मैं भी एक सेशन कर रहा हूँ। कहते सेशन करके जल्दी से आ जाओ, वी आर हैविंग अ सेलिब्रेशन, बिकॉज कैदी जो है बहुत खुश है। तो वो फिर हमने उनसे पूछा, उन्होंने कहा कि ये हमारा कलेक्टिव एफर्ट था, हमने डिसाइड किया कि हम वायलेंस एज अ वे ऑफ लाइफ नहीं करेंगे। तो वो था मेरा कैदियों के साथ काम करने का। तो और उनके साथ काम करके मुझे एक काफ़ी जो है गहरा उनके मन के बारे में पता चला था कि वो क्यों करते हैं। तो उस वक्त जो प्रिजन के हेड थे RS गुप्ता, वो उसके बाद दिल्ली के कमिश्नर नियुक्त हुए। तो कमिश्नर नियुक्त होने के बाद उन्होंने मुझसे कहा कि आपका कैदियों के बारे में, क्राइम के बारे में इतना नॉलेज है, आप पुलिस को हेल्प क्यों नहीं करते इन इन्वेस्टिगेशंस। तो मैंने कहा श्योर। तो मैंने वो करना शुरू किया। दैट वाज फ्रॉम गोइंग फ्रॉम प्रिजनर्स टू पुलिस साइकोलॉजिस्ट। तो उसमें ये हुआ कि जब मैं पुलिस को हेल्प करता था, बिकॉज मेनी ऑफ द क्राइम्स आर बिहेवियरल क्राइम्स, तो उसमें उनको अक्सर दे कुड जीरो डाउन ऑन द एक्यूज्ड, ऑन द फ्रॉम द सस्पेक्ट। वो पकड़ पाते थे कि किसने ऐसा काम किया है। और उसके बाद मुझे कोर्ट में भी जाना पड़ता था टेस्टिफाई करने के लिए, क्योंकि जो है वो उसमें से प्रोसेसेस ऐसे होते थे जो साइकोलॉजिकल होते थे। तो जजेस भी जो है मुझे वो सुनते थे, और इस तरह से करीब 200-300 केसेस में मैंने जो है टेस्टिफाई किया है अपनी लाइफ में। तो क्रिमिनल जस्टिस सिस्टम के 3 अंग होते हैं। एक होता है प्रिजन्स, एक होता है जो पुलिस, और एक होता है जो है जुडिशियरी। तो प्रिजन्स के साथ मैं ऑलरेडी काम कर रहा था, पुलिस के साथ मैं ऑलरेडी काम कर रहा था, जुडिशियरी के साथ काम करना मेरा शुरू हो गया, और उसी के थ्रू मैं ह्यूमन राइट्स के टच में आया। तो अब जो है मेरा फील्ड इन तीनों में हो गया था, मेनली मैं काम कर रहा था। तो उस वक्त मेरा पहला मुझे वो याद है कि मेरा काम शोक पे, ग्रीफ पे था। तो मुझे नेशनल ह्यूमन राइट्स कमीशन से एक दिन फ़ोन आया, वो जस्टिस सेन थे। उन्होंने कहा कि तभी गुजरात राइट्स हुए थे, तो उन्होंने कहा क्या आप हमारे जो है, वी वांट टू गिव समवन द रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑफ वर्किंग विद द ट्रॉमा ऑफ द पीपल अफेक्टेड, तो वी थिंक ऑफ यू, वुड यू लाइक टू डू दैट। So it was a kind of a honorary project in a sense that they only paid for the travel expenses. So we managed everything. Now that is when I started working with mass scale trauma, of people. And one of the things that struck me, my first experience of Gujarat riots was that everybody wanted to talk about the trauma that Muslims had gone through. For me, the trauma was equal. Whether it was Hindus or Muslims did not make a difference. But everybody wanted to focus on the Muslim trauma. So that is the time मुझे लगा कि ये इतना partial क्यों है. मतलब मैं हिंदू ट्रॉमा के बारे में बात भी करना चाहता था, जैसे जो 58 लोग जो ट्रेन में जो हु वर बर्न्ड अलाइव, जब मैंने उनके बारे में बात करना चाहा तो एनएचआरसी में भी, इसमें भी उन्होंने कहा कि नहीं नहीं इसके बारे में बात मत कीजिए.
ऐसा स्पेसिफिकली बोला.
यस, मतलब इतने क्लियर में तो नहीं बोला, बट जैसे आप कैंप्स में ही फोकस कीजिए, आप इसके बाहर मत जाइए. तो मैंने कहा कि माय थिंग वाज टू वर्क विद चिल्ड्रन who had gone through adolescents, young adults who have gone through the trauma. So they are everywhere. Even people who are burnt alive in the train, they have gone through trauma.
Right.
So I want to work with everyone. I mean, for me, it is not कि मैं community based seclusion करूँगा. That's one. जो दूसरा इंसिडेंट था वो ये था कि एक इंसिडेंट बहुत उस वक्त रिपोर्ट हुआ था कि a number of women have been sexually assaulted. तो वहाँ पे मैं और निधि और मेरे साथ और भी मेरे 2 कलीग्स हम गए थे. तो जब हमने उनसे बात की तो पता चला कि देयर वाज नो मास सेक्सुअल असॉल्ट एट ऑल. इनफैक्ट इट वाज, उन्होंने सिर्फ इतना कहा था कि हमारी इज्जत पे हाथ डाला था हमें, लेकिन मतलब इट वाज लाइक सम accidental touching or some even motivated touching, but nothing of that kind which the media had blown it up to be. तो जब मैंने इसके बारे में भी बताया कि ऐसा नहीं हुआ था, so I was told to be keep it shut. हाँ, तो नहीं इसके बारे में बात नहीं करते हैं. So मतलब it was not so direct, but the message I was getting was that talk about the trauma undergone by Muslims, not undergone by Hindus. So और उसके बाद
blow that up.
And yes, exaggerate it, amplify it, blow that up. So that is the time it began to affect me very seriously, that why this kind of preferential thing, that we don't focus upon that. So then I became interested in Hindu, why is Hindu trauma being suppressed? There was another also incident. I'm married into a Kashmiri Pundit family. My wife is a Kashmiri Pundit. And we heard stories about relatives of ours who had run away from Kashmir, who have gone away from there. And one of the Kashmiri persons who used to work in the camp asked us कि क्या आप camps में काम करने आएंगे? Because there are a lot of psychological symptoms. So we started working. All these were voluntary work. There was no, nobody was. We arranged it from our own resources. तो जब मैंने उनसे बात किया तो मुझे पता चला कि they have not spoken about what has happened to them. Much of it was secret. In fact, in one group, a group of women told that how they were sexually assaulted to my wife Nidhi. Right? जब वो वहाँ से कश्मीर से भागे हुए आ रहे थे तो they wanted to protect their men. They wanted to protect so that they don't feel ashamed that it has happened. They had to keep it under wraps. और पहली बार जब we were having a group therapy, they began to talk about it. So उनमें से एक एल्डरली औरत थी, उन्होंने कहा कि बेटा जो हुआ है वो हम बदल नहीं सकते, लेकिन दिल के अंदर मत रखो, यही वो लोग कह रहे हैं, तो तुम जो है ये इनको, referring to my wife and another psychologist, why don't you talk about it? So that is the time I became intrigued by the trauma that Hindus have gone through and what has happened to make them like this. The other incident which is related to this is that in the Kashmiri camp when we were working, it was an incident with one of the teachers. वहाँ पे एक टीचर थे जिन्होंने हमसे पूछा एक दिन कि आप लोग यहाँ क्यों आते हैं? मैंने कहा कि आप लोगों का सदमा समझने के लिए. तो वो हंस के बोले कि आप समझते हैं इस कैंप, आप जानते हैं इस कैंप का नाम क्या है? मैंने कहा हाँ, मुट्ठी कैंप. कहते नहीं, हम लोग इसको जो है औरंगज़ेब का सपना वाला कैंप कहते हैं. तो मैंने कहा कि ये औरंगज़ेब कहाँ से आ गए बीच में, वो तो 300 साल पहले थे। तो फिर मैंने जब सर्च किया तो मुझे पता चला कि औरंगज़ेब का सपना था कि कश्मीर जो है पूरा मुस्लिम बनेगा। And Muthi camp was the last camp in which the last Hindus from Kashmir came and settled down. So Kashmir became free of Hindus. कश्मीर हिंदुओं से फ्री हो गया। तो ये औरंगज़ेब का सपना जो था वो मुट्ठी कैंप में आके पूरा हो गया। तो यही हम आपस में बात करते हैं। तो तब मुझे लगा कि जो है ट्रॉमा की जो हिस्ट्री होती है वो कितनी मतलब कैरी होती है। 300 साल पुराना एक उसका अपना सपना, people ran away in phases, they settled down. So what I found is that the trauma that the people were describing, that also had a historical aspect to that.
Yeah.
So then I became interested.
I wanted to probe a little here. What I heard somewhere was that before you went into these, the Gujarat riot, when you were called to, you were, should I say, you were not oblivious to this Hindu-Muslim differentiation, and you didn't differentiate between the two. It was your experience there that you became aware of this discrimination against the Hindus by the political sort of milieu at that time.
I discovered it was political. I discovered that the nature of trauma is political, to exclude. Before that, for me, any trauma was all. Trauma was trauma. The skin color. Yes, I was sensitive to blacks or other people who had undergone trauma. I was aware of it. लेकिन मुझे इतना awareness नहीं था कि ये मेरे देश में, ये मेरे सामने हो रहा है और मुझे जो है इसका पता नहीं है। Because मैं बहुत
कोप कैसे किया आपने जब आपको लगा कि
मुझे बहुत शॉक लगा। मुझे बहुत शॉक लगा। मैंने कहा कि मैं हिंदुओं के ट्रॉमा के बारे में बात नहीं कर सकता, लेकिन बाकियों का, मुस्लिम्स के ट्रॉमा के बारे में बात करता हूँ। तो आई एम गोइंग टू प्ले अ रोल, आई एम गोइंग टू प्ले अ सर्टेन कैरेक्टर इन टॉकिंग अबाउट दैट, बट आई कैन नॉट बी माई नेचुरल सेल्फ इफ आई वर टू टॉक अबाउट हिंदू ट्रॉमा। मेरे प्रोफेसर्स, मेरे फ्रेंड्स सब जो थे, उन्होंने मुझे यही सलाह दी, यही एडवाइस दिया कि इसके बारे में बात मत करो। उन्होंने भी सब ने यही कहा।
What do you think was the reason?
They were all they had a left liberal orientation, as I discover right now. Talking about Hindu trauma was a matter of shame. It is not something that you talk about. It is something that is best relegated to the background, right? So, but the moment it is to do with Muslims or minorities means Muslims over here mostly, and sometimes maybe others. So you can talk about it, but Hindu trauma, no. So this
Do you see a psychological issue here?
very much.
Can you explain that, what that could be?
The psychological issue is that the Hindus are in denial about their own trauma. That's one. And the fact is that the Mughals, the British, they committed so many atrocities on us. And the Hindus, they have been in consistent denial about the atrocities done upon them. There is culture of silence that pervades that. For example, what I was talking about, the Birla Temple incident yesterday. When I talk to people that it is the oldest magnificent temple in Delhi, I was talking about it some time back in a meeting with some police officers. They said, we have been in Delhi all this while, but we never thought about it. We never. So now this is clear denial. I mean, these people who manage Delhi, Delhi's law and order, who know intimately about Delhi, do not know this aspect about Delhi at all, that the oldest magnificent temple in Delhi is only, it's not even 100 years old. And it was built during freedom struggle. It was built because the spirit of nationalism came up and helped the Hindus. Hindus को help किया अपने fear से निकलने के लिए, ताकि वो जो है ऐसे एक बड़ा magnificent temple
इसको तो गांधी जी ने
inaugurate किया था.
Only temple.
Only temple it was inaugurated. That's what I found. And Gandhiji, was very he was very clear about his image. वो ऐसा कोई भी चीज़ नहीं करना चाहते थे जिससे मुस्लिम्स को धक्का लगे, लेकिन वो इस विषय में उन्होंने जो है not only he supported but he came to inaugurate, he got himself involved in the whole process and he made a rule that कि अगर इसमें किसी का कास्ट, किसी तरह का कास्ट डिस्क्रिमिनेशन नहीं होगा वगैरह वगैरह etc etc, but he gave his full heart and support to that. My hunch is that he knew what a magnificent thing it was, you know, that after so many centuries
एक symbolic
a resurrection resurrection is taking place in the Hindu psyche. So unfortunately that did not continue itself with the coming of you know, independence, because Nehru probably was very much of a secular and, you know, kind of person who did not want this aspect of Hindu consciousness and development to take place. Yeah.
जो हमारे पढ़े लिखे वर्ग में एक समस्या दिखाई देती है कई तरह की, एक तरह का डीप इन्फीरियॉरिटी भी है, एक तरह का डिनाइल भी है, एक तरह का मास्क, कलेक्टिव मास्क, मतलब इंडिविजुअल तो हम लोग सब अपने अपने मास्क पहने हुए होते होंगे, लेकिन ये कलेक्टिव एक प्रिटेंशियस बिहेवियर इन पब्लिक। और मैं तो इसको इवन जो करप्शन है जो बहुत डीप रूटेड, वो भी मैं इससे रिलेट करता हूँ कि कहीं क्या ये आपसे ये पूछना चाह रहा हूँ कि एज अ साइकोलॉजिस्ट डू यू सी कि ये जो हमारे फ्लॉ आ गए हैं हमारे कैरेक्टर में पढ़े लिखे लोगों के बीच में, वो हमारे पास से रिलेट करते हैं? आप उसको, हाँ, उस पर थोड़ा बात करें।
जो हमारे फ्लॉज हैं वो काफ़ी हद तक, मैं इसको कॉजिटिव तो नहीं कहूँगा, लेकिन मैं ये ज़रूर कहूँगा कि द मेजर कंट्रीब्यूटरी फैक्टर हैज़ बीन द फैक्ट कि वी वर एंस्लेव्ड फॉर सो लॉन्ग. Corruption has been seen to be linked with slavery, with colonialism. There have been several studies which have shown that colonialism can be actually linked to corruption, right? Because when power is so asymmetric, when power is very much, you know, based upon control, so corruption naturally increases. Like one of the highest one of the highest corruption was in concentration camps. You know, like Germans were not corrupt as a people, but there was high corruption in concentration camps because of the nature of power in the concentration camp. Right? So power and corruption are deeply interlinked with each other. जो हमारे समाज में है, जो प्रेजेंट सोसाइटी के साथ जो ये करप्शन इतना बढ़ गया है, one of the root causes has been that the colonialism which caused transfer of power, it led to a highly asymmetric you know, position in which nothing really changed except for the color of the skin. So that is definitely linked to that. The educated class is very much alienated from its language, from its roots, from its culture. We feel very ashamed of owning ourselves up. We talk about going ethnic, but we don't talk about being our natural selves. So this comes from a deep sense of shame and humiliation that predates to the colonial times. Like आपको जैसे पता होगा कि colonial times में you had to ask for a chit of paper whether you can sit in presence of an Englishman or not, right? Okay. So if you see in the present also, so many times you enter a high officer's office or someone, one of the first things is that, okay, you are not going to sit down over here, right? How dare you sit down? इनफैक्ट जब मैं प्रिजन्स में काम करता था तो आई यूज टू आस्क फॉर यू नो दैट मेरे लिए वो चेयर ले आते थे जबकि प्रिजनर्स मेरे साथ नीचे बैठते थे. तो मैंने कहा मुझे चेयर पे बैठने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, बिकॉज चेयर्स जो है वो सुपरिटेंडेंट के रूम में करीब आधा किलोमीटर दूर होता था. मैंने कहा नोबडी शुड गो, मैं नीचे बैठ जाऊंगा, राइट? गद्दा होता है वो रोल करके जो है बैठ जाऊंगा. मैंने देखा कि दैट लेड टू अ मेजर क्राइसिस इन द प्रिजन्स. हाँ सर, आप जो है वो अफसर लेवल के हैं, अफसर जो है वो चेयर पे बैठता है और प्रिजनर जो है वो आइदर उसके सामने नीचे बैठता है ऑन हिज हॉन्चेस, और वो जो है इक्वल नहीं हो सकता. right? So this kind of asymmetric behavior, like I have also worked in prisons abroad. वहाँ पे इस तरह का issue नहीं है. I have interrogated people in other countries as part of being a psychologist. There are two chairs.
Yeah.
Whatever the person's status is, they come and sit down. We are at the same level, and we keep on talking. But here in India, you have to sit on the floor. अभी भी आप बड़े अफसर के रूम में जाएंगे, वहाँ देखेंगे कि गांव वाले जो है वो अपने haunches पे बैठे हुए हैं. जब मैं बोलूँगा तब खड़े हो गए, ऐसे बैठे रहो, right? Now this is a very colonial behavior. इंग्लिशमैन के साथ में जो है ये होता था, एंड आवर लोकल पीपल आर द लोकल ऑफिसर्स आर आल्सो कैरिंग दैट. देयर इज अ ट्रांसफर, देयर इज नॉट अ ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन दैट हैज टेकन प्लेस ओवर देयर, राइट? मुझे याद है कि जब मेरे साथ ये हुआ तो मैंने कहा मैं किसी के साथ, किसी इंसान के साथ ऐसे झुक के बात नहीं कर सकता. जैसे सर ये तो प्रिजन का कल्चर है, ये आप कैसे चेंज कर सकते हैं? तो मैंने कहा ठीक है, देखिए आप ऐसे देखिए कि मैं एक मनोवैज्ञानिक हूँ, मैं फेस स्टडी करता हूँ, मेरे लिए फेशियल इमोशन स्टडी करना बहुत ज़रूरी है. जो ज़मीन पे बैठा हुआ है उसका मैं नहीं कर सकता, तो ही हैज़ टू बी एट द सेम लेवल. आप सुन के शायद हंसेंगे, लेकिन उसके बाद उन्होंने डिस्कस किया और उसके बाद प्रिजनर्स के लिए स्टूल लाया गया, लेकिन तब भी चेयर नहीं.
सेम लेवल करने के लिए.
थोड़ा सा तो सर देखिए सर, हम आपकी इतनी बात मान गए हैं, थोड़ा सा तो डिफरेंस रखिए सर. उसको स्टूल दिया है. तो मैंने कहा कि ठीक है, मुझे इससे आगे जो है लड़ना नहीं चाहिए, यहीं तक जो है यहीं तक की लड़ाई वो है. तो इस तरह के बहुत से बिहेवियर, सैकड़ों बिहेवियर हम नोट कर सकते हैं, विच point out to the fact that we are carrying on a colonial mindset. And आई थिंक मैं जैसे कह रहा था कि 2 हफ्ते पहले एक नेशनल सेमिनार हुई थी. उसमें जो है जो हमारी इस वक्त गवर्निंग पार्टी है, उसमें उन्होंने कई मिनिस्टर्स ने कॉलोनियल माइंडसेट वर्ड को कई बार रिपीट किया. तो मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई कि देयर इज़ अ सर्टेन अवेयरनेस दैट इज़ गोइंग देयर, एंड you know it is trying to change the way the societal structures, behaviors are conducted, right?
पर ये एक और जो मैं उसको ऐसा लगता है, मतलब आई एम नॉट अ साइकोलॉजिस्ट, और पर मुझे कभी कभी लगता है कि ये मुग़लों के काल में या इस्लामिक युग में, सिर्फ मुग़ल नहीं कहें, उसमें जब ये सारे मंदिर तोड़े गए, जिसकी आप बात करते हैं कि भाई दिल्ली में पहली बार इतना बड़ा मंदिर, बिरला मंदिर बना 1939 में. उसके पहले कोई मंदिर ही नहीं दिखता है बड़ा, और ये पूरे उत्तर भारत की बात है. तो इतना जो ये हुआ होगा, उससे जो एक कलेक्टिव ट्रॉमा, उससे ये जो इन्फ्लुएंस हुआ होगा लोगों के ऊपर, उसका क्या ये असर नहीं हुआ होगा कि हम अपने घरों में घुस गए? यानी कि भाई बाहर की दुनिया से में अपना काम से काम रखो, और जो पॉलिटिकल या सार्वजनिक इश्यूज हैं उसमें ज़्यादा दखल मत रखो, बच के चलो. और वो ही टेंडेंसी आज भी दिखाई देती है एक तरह से. मतलब पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज जो भी करती हों, लेकिन जो रियल इश्यूज हैं सोसाइटी के, फॉर इंस्टेंस लेट्स से हिंदू मुस्लिम इशू है, तो मुझे याद है कि जब ये बाबरी मस्जिद गिरी, उसके बाद एक चेन्नई में बैठक हुई थी, और उसमें धर्मपाल जी थे, और एक वहाँ के बहुत पुराने हकीम जी थे. उनकी उम्र उस समय शायद लेट 80s या अर्ली 90s की थी. उनकी बहुत सम्मान था, मुस्लिम थे, वो भी उस मीटिंग में आए. और उस मीटिंग में उन्होंने एक बात कही थी जो धर्मपाल जी का बहुत कोट करते थे. उन्होंने कहा कि भाई हम लोगों के तो आपस में बात, सच्चाई से तो बात होनी ही बंद हो गई है. हम जो पहले तो बात ही नहीं होती है, और बात होती भी है तो इन्होंने वो शब्द यूज़ नहीं किया डिनायल का, पर वो ऊपर ऊपर की बात होती है. बहुत अच्छी बातें होती, जो रियल इश्यूज है उसको हम डिस्कस ही नहीं करते. तो ये मसला तो तब तक रिजॉल्व ही नहीं होने वाला है जब तक आप कम से कम सही सच्ची बात करें, ऑथेंटिक बात करें. ये जो कमी है कि हम ऑथेंटिक बात करना भूल गए हैं, और ख़ास करके हमारा एजुकेटेड वर्ग, ये शायद इसका रिलेशनशिप वो ज़माने से है जब हम अपने घरों में घुस गए. कल आपने कहा कि दिल्ली की बात पर मैं आपको ये शायद आपने नोटिस किया होगा, मैं राजस्थान से हूँ ओरिजिनली. तो राजस्थान में अगर आप जाएं, मैं जयपुर की बात नहीं करता, लेकिन अब अगर आप चूरू जाएं, आप शेखावाटी के इलाके में जाएं, तो आप पाएंगे कि वहाँ भी सार्वजनिक मंदिर हार्डली आपको दिखाई देते हैं, और दिखाई देंगे तो बहुत नए दिखाई देंगे। ज़्यादातर मंदिर बड़े सेठों की हवेलियों के अंदर में हैं, तो अंदर में, लेकिन वहाँ लोग जाते हैं। तो ऐसा शायद हुआ होगा उस समय कि भाई, क्योंकि उनसे ज़्यादा छेड़छाड़ी नहीं हुई, देवर ट्रेडर्स, तो उनकी वजह तो पूरा सरकार का काम ही रुक जाएगा। तो उन्होंने कहा कि मंदिर हमारे हैं, आप उधर आइए और वहाँ पूजा कर लीजिए, बाहर के मंदिर को नहीं है। तो ये टेंडेंसी आपको शहर 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 में दिखाई देती है, सब जगह दिखाई देती है। और मैं वो कल जब आप बात कर रहे थे तो मैं उससे रिलेट कर पा रहा था कि शायद ये इस वजह से हो। तो ये जो डर है और ये जो अपने काम से काम रखना और सार्वजनिक क्षेत्र में ऊपर ऊपर की बात करना, ये सारा का सारा मैं इससे कलेक्टिव ट्रॉमा से अब जोड़ पा रहा हूँ। वो आपको ठीक लगती है ये?
बिल्कुल, अवश्य, मैं ये पूरी तरह से सहमत हूँ। जैसे ट्रॉमा जब होती है, जब हमारे ऊपर कोई आती है, तो हमारा मन जो है वो सर्वाइवल के ऊपर जाता है कि कैसे मैं अपना बचाव करूं, कैसे मैं अपने परिवार का बचाव करूं, क्योंकि हमारा जो फियर होता है, जो डर होता है, वो इस पे जाता है कि शायद मैं इससे बाहर न निकल पाऊँ, ये मेरी डेथ हो जाए। Trauma is related to threats. Yes. Trauma is related to feeling that I will not be able to survive. So there is always a threat associated with that. तो उससे क्या होता है कि हमारा माइंड, हमारा ब्रेन जो है वो सर्वाइवल मोड में चला जाता है और वहीं पे फ्रीज हो जाता है। जैसे जैसे अगर मैं एक एग्जांपल दूं, जैसे आप मान लीजिए जंगल से जा रहे हैं और अंधेरे का टाइम है, आपने लाइट ऑन किया है, सडनली आपके सामने एक डियर आ जाता है, द डियर फ्रीजेस, वो एकदम फ्रीज हो जाता है। दैट इज अ ट्रॉमेटिक रिस्पॉन्स। द डियर डजंट नो दैट, द डियर बिलीव्स कि अगर मैं एकदम स्टिल हो जाऊं तो मैं बच जाऊंगा। जैसे हम जंगल में करते हैं कि सांस रोक के लेट जाओ, बेयर आपको छोड़ के चला जाएगा। बी स्टिल एंड यू सर्वाइव, right? So in trauma also, biologically we freeze and we believe that we can survive, right? So ये सिर्फ individuals के लिए नहीं, society के लिए भी होता है। A society believes that if it freezes, if it just focuses on survival and nothing else, and जैसा आपने कहा कि अपने काम से मतलब रखो, उसके बाहर that we call a freezing response, तो आप बच पाओगे, आप survive कर पाओगे, right? उससे निकलने के लिए एक समाज को करीब, डिपेंडिंग अपॉन द लेवल ऑफ ट्रॉमा एंड सपोर्ट, इट टेक्स definitely 2 to 3 generations.
If something is done.
If something is done, and when the society again starts to feel safe again, जैसे example is given of Armenian genocide in 1920s, but it is only the descendants in the 90s, 80s and 90s who began to raise the topic. Then it became bigger, and Turkey responded with a lot of anger, and then they became a force to reckon with, took their issue to the United Nations, and the Armenian genocide was recognized. So it took them almost 60 to 70 years to come to that level where they could slowly get over their feeling of extinction, of being exterminated, and survival issues went down before they could look into it again. Right. So a society cannot introspect as long as it is in a survival mode. Right. जब हम सर्वाइवल मोड में होते हैं तो हम इंट्रोस्पेक्शन नहीं कर पाते। आप सोचिए, अगर घर पे आग लगी होगी तो क्या आप उस वक्त बैठ के सोचेंगे कि क्या हो रहा है? उस वक्त आपका होगा कि मैं कैसे भाग सकता हूँ, घर में से किसी को बचाने की जरूरत तो नहीं है। योर माइंड विल बी ऑन दैट, एंड द प्रोलॉन्ग्ड इट इज, the bigger it is, it'll remain frozen in that mode for a long time. That's why trauma is said to be a freezing response for societies.
Right. तो ये एक तो इस्लामिक युग में ये जो हम हुआ, उसके बाद उसकी एक तरह से कंटिन्यूटी हुई अंग्रेज़ों के काल में, और उसमें थोड़ा और सोने पे सुहागा जैसे बोलते हैं, या नीम करेला चढ़ा, कि वो एक सेंस ऑफ शेम भी इन्फ्यूज़ हो गया हमारे अपने कल्चर के प्रति, सिविलाइजेशन के प्रति, वे ऑफ डूइंग थिंग्स एटसेट्रा।
जो मुगल्स थे, they targeted mostly on the Kshatriya group because they saw their rule being threatened by all these Rajasthan kings and princes. The English, they did not see themselves threatened by Kshatriyas. They saw themselves threatened by the Brahmins because the Brahmins were the repository of knowledge. And the British felt that if they have to rule over here, they have to intellectually finish us off. And the intellectual repository was with the Brahmins. So if you see all this talk about destroying Brahmanism, equating Brahmanism with Hinduism, came with the English missionaries who started targeting the Brahmins and the schools. The British destroyed the schools in India, the universities, and they brought their own missionary schools. They brought their own, style of teaching, which took over. So the two targeted different groups of society, but the underlying thing was both was the same. It was to create shame and humiliation so that the society can be ruled and controlled and can never get up on its feet again.
लेकिन इस्लामिक युग में क्षत्रियों को जो भी किया होगा, लेकिन हमारे जो आर्टिजन क्लास है, कारीगर समाज में बहुत बड़ा कन्वर्जन भी तो हुआ है उस समय। मतलब आज के दिन ऐसा कई लोग मानते हैं कि 90% मुसलमान जो है वो कन्वर्टेड हिंदू है, मे बी मोर। बहुत थोड़े से ईरान और ये पश्चिम एशिया से आए हुए लोग हैं, बाकी जो अशराफ और वो लोग हैं, बाकी पसमंदा तो करीब करीब सारा ही हिंदू से कन्वर्ट हुआ है। तो ऑनस्लॉट सिर्फ उधर नहीं था, छोटी तथाकथित जो निम्न वर्ग की जातियां उन पे भी ऑनस्लॉट था और उनको कन्वर्ट किया गया, ये सब था।
मैं पूरी तरह से सहमत हूँ कि दे ट्राइड टू कन्वर्ट एवरीवन and there was no, but I'm talking of the main focus, from whom they experienced the threat was from these two institutions and classes.
तो ये बड़ा ये कि हमको आज़ादी मिली 47 में, लेकिन उसके पहले ये एक शायद प्रोसेस चला है, थोड़ा बहुत मैंने पढ़ा, इससे मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि अंग्रेज़ों को ये कहीं ना कहीं ये लगने लगा था आफ्टर द सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर और ड्यूरिंग दैट टाइम कि अब हमको हिंदुस्तान को तो आज़ादी देनी ही पड़ेगी। उसमें बहुत सारे फैक्टर्स थे, खाली कांग्रेस का रोल नहीं है, नेताजी का भी रोल है, आईएनए का भी रोल है, और भी बहुत सारे इंटरनेशनल इस तरह के।
एक और रोल जो है मैं शेयर करना चाहूँगा अगर आप अनुमति दें, वो ये है कि जो द बिगेस्ट ब्रिटिश फियर was the fear of captivity. जो अगर हम 16th सेंचुरी से लेकर प्रेजेंट ब्रिटिश टाइम्स तक देखें, द कॉलोनियल टाइम्स, the British, the Europeans, and later the British, they were going out in big numbers. They were taken captives in a lot of places. Those captives, they recorded their journals. And the fear of being taken a captive was very deep in the British. And that fear of captivity rose very high during the time in the 40s, when the INA was, coming forward. And secondly, when the soldiers came back from the war, there was a chance of a, revolution, a rebellion taking place. So that fear of captivity got activated and arose exponentially at that time, which is a very close kept British secret. This is what I'm writing about in my coming book, The Island Without a Shore, because the more I studied archival material, the more I found that how much the fear of captivity dominated the British consciousness. They could not face it, and particularly the British had several fears. One was about being converted to Islam, being circumcised. Their women and children being taken captive, which they were taken earlier, and they died, and they never dealt with that. It was a transgenerational trauma for the British that always was at the back. It arose very high during the 1857 revolt, or the War of Independence, as I call it. So that fear of captivity, being taken captive again, always remained. And the British felt that if in 47, if they don't go, there will be a mass rebellion, they will be all taken captives. And that fear was, I think, was, yeah, it also played a role, and I think it was the major dominating factor why they left, more than anything else. Right? So that is what I'm writing about in the book.
Also in the sense that there's a power shift which is happening. power is shifting from England to America. It's around Second World War. And the American president famously said, I mean, it is recorded to the British ambassador that, you know, when you give independence to India as your business, this is 42 when Roosevelt says this, but make sure that India stays in the Western orbit.
Or
Right.
world, yes.
So then the question which I am asking you is that we became independent in 47. This collective trauma of 1,000 years or 800 years, 900 years, something should have been done after that.
Yes, nothing was done.
Why do you think nothing was done? And what do you see, if any change is happening now? How do you see that transition happening? What has happened? Why, first my question is, why did nothing happen after 47?
Nothing happened after 47, primarily because one of the reasons was leadership. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the leadership went into the hands of a person who was not very much rooted in the soil of India. So he was a very westernized person whose mindset was extremely Western and English, and who did not feel the need for transformation, that he did not understand Indian history in terms of the trauma that the Indians had gone through. If you read the discovery of India, it would seem like a narration of events, something like as if a football match is going on. It doesn't sound like a rootedness in the country and also the trauma that Indians have gone through. Right. You don't see him empathizing with the trauma that different groups, different people had gone through. In fact, the people who actually gave India freedom were people who were traumatized or who understood trauma, but they did not get into power. And that was, I think, the chief reason why nothing really took place. I believe that if Patel was the prime minister or if Bose was the prime minister, probably a lot of it would have been very different. But people with the colonial mindsets took over after that. And that colonial mindset has ruled India ever
In
since
all
then.
fields,
In
whether
all,
it's
in
academics or it is
institutions,
bureaucracy or, yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
because it flows from the political leadership, how they want to do so, and nothing really changed. Like, for example, if I see our educational history, our education does not talk about the trauma that we have gone through, right? I remember one of my friends he's a psychologist who had come from abroad, and I had taken him to Birla Temple, and I was telling him about its history. He was surprised. He said, "But I have not read it anywhere." Then he, after I sat down, he went around. He says there is no board outside which tells of the history of this temple, that it was probably built after so long. He says, why are you denying such an important part of your history? Why is it that it is not there part of your education? Why don't you raise children with that awareness of the trauma that they have gone through? Like in Germany, history is taught to teach German children about why there should not be a third world war, why they should not do so. If you see Jewish history is taught to the children, emphasizing upon why Jews should never become the victim of a second or a third Holocaust ever, how they should survive, right? So this kind of a history which takes into account the suffering of the people, what they have actually gone through, our history does not teach us that. So therefore, as a result, our children do not grow up with that awareness of what our ancestors have gone through, right? So this, I believe, is a very important aspect. In fact, to tell you a story, I was in US a couple of just before the COVID, and I went to a temple. My host was with me, and I saw this group of Indian children sitting there. They were brought by Indian parents to help them feel rooted, as they called it. So, there was this priest, Indian Hindu priest, sitting over there teaching them Gita. I saw the children's faces completely bored, not interested at all. So then when we came in, the priest knew. He says, "आप थोड़ा सा अब बात कर लीजिए इन बच्चों से." So I started talking. I said, "I'll not talk to you about religion. I'll talk to you about people who died for religion and what did they do." And I saw that their faces became interested. I talked about different people who gave their lives, how they fought and struggled, and I talked in a what you call children's language. And afterwards, the children said this was the most interesting session that we ever had. Why can't we get people like him more often to come and talk to us, right? Now, in all reverence to the priest, what he was talking was of a very high order, sublime, deep, but he simply could not connect with the children, right? I could do so because as a, didactic psychologist, right, knowing the pedagogy, I wish that priests knew some bit of pedagogy in order to reach out to the children. I wish our priests would know that kind of pedagogy by which they can reach out to the children. So we need that kind of approach today to reach out, to educate our children and young adults about our past, about our history, and then we would notice a shift in the institution. This should have taken place at the time when the British left us.
Yeah, but why does it happen with the Jews? Why does it happen with the Armenians and it doesn't happen here? What could be the reason?
It happened with the Jews because they were driven to the, as we say, till the end of the wall. They were just pushed to the end where they realized that either we fight or we die, right? They came to the point of extermination. The same happened for Armenians, right? It probably we are reaching towards that right now because there is a threat of extermination. The theme, I see it becoming very prominent in the national discourse right now. हम खत्म हो जाएंगे. We are right now being pushed more and more, and therefore you see the nationalism also rising in India right now. So a little more towards it, if we go, then we will fully fight back and then we will give it back. That is what I see. We are going on that path right now.
Coming back to the same question, which you have explained that according to you, why things didn't change after 47. But what do you see? I mean, the one is that, please expand on it a little more, that why is it so important to face your trauma and to come out of it? And I'm again talking not at the individual level, but collectively as a society, as a nation, in the context of India. Why do you think it is so important? And how do we go about it? This is the second question.
Sure. Why it is important to face your trauma?
Because most people say it's happened in the past, अब पुरानी बात हो गई, अब उसको क्यों छेड़ते हो, let it be, that ये सब argument आते हैं, you know.
Sure.
हाँ.
We need to learn sometimes from other societies. As many philosophers, many psychologists, many scholars have said, the past is not past. We cannot forget. We never forget. Did we forget Ram Janmabhoomi? For 500 years we carried on, right? Trauma is never forgotten. It resides in your brain. It alters, changes your gene expression. So if you say, let it be, let bygones be bygones, these are statements, right? But this is not something which is, this is never the reality that you will find. So, trauma is something that resides in us, in our bodies, in our collective, and it waits till it finds a time when you feel safe again to express it, right? Whether at an individual level or whether at a collective level, a society looks for a time when it feels safe, and then the trauma starts coming up again, right? Like in 2014, there was a sense of safety that came about. People began to feel very threatened, right? And because there was a new level of safety that started coming about, all the past issues about what we have gone through, it started coming up. It is a mere coincidence that social media also became active at the same time. But if you see, with social media becoming active, it has not happened so much in other countries like it has happened in India. In India right now, there is a deep intrigue about what happened in our past, what happened to our roots, right? The history that we taught, it was full of lies, it was not true. So there is a deep interest in wanting to go back to the past. And this has happened because of a certain rupture that has taken place in society. I call 2014 the year of rupture. You know, ruptures take place in society. A rupture is like a crack, it's like a tectonic shift. When it takes place in earth, there is an earthquake, like it happened in 9/11 in USA. The question on everybody's mind was that, why does the world hate us? Americans thought that the entire world is grateful to them for what they are doing, and it suddenly struck them that, hey, the world does not. The world hates us. Why does the world hate us so much, right? So there was a tectonic shift that took place, and it created a massive going back into the roots of what does it mean to be an American. So massive events in society, particularly of the kind of which is 9/11 or other national calamities or events, very often bring up the identity of the society again in question. So we start reinventing ourselves. And such a tectonic shift took place in 2014 with the change of government, which represented a completely different mode of thinking, a completely different mode of thought process that came about. First time we saw a prime minister who lies and does Sashtang Dandavat Pranam in a temple. No prime minister did that. He was someone who was very open about reclaiming his Hindu identity. So the society as a whole also took the cue and started reclaiming their identity, their heritage. This did not happen in 1947. What the prime minister at that time did was that he only carried on the legacy of the British. He did not try to change that and say that I would like to reclaim our heritage that we had lost. I studied discovery of India. The most important quality about that book is that it doesn't seem to be written by an Indian. It seems to be written by a Britisher, a British historian, completely detached from Indian ethos and Indian roots.
You can, of course, about Nehru, that not many will dispute what you are saying.
Sure.
But no, we've had, of course, very short period, Shastri ji, and then Vajpayee ji for 5 years. But what you are saying is you're not even mentioning them, and that's very interesting. And you're saying there's a shift, a major shift happening after 2014.
2014, yes.
So I think what I hear you say is also that even those were not that kind of shift. This is a major shift. Now, how do you, so this is a little more nuanced question that I'm trying to ask you. And
Yeah, there were not shifts. With Vajpayee ji, however much I may admire him, but I don't think a shift took place at that time. They continued by and large in terms of our thought processes, our institutions. Nothing was changed. With Shastri ji also, Shastri ji very much he was hardly there and he was very much in that mold. He was a deeply honest person, but intellectually, none of them felt like changing it. The Congress government gave the power to define what should be our education to Marxists, to Islamists, to liberal people, and it remained in their hands, right? It is only now that with the coming of Mr. Modi in power, that there is a tectonic shift which I see noticing, which is taking place in here in this field, and the education is soon going to be one of the fields that he is going to take over and change. His focus has been more on economics. He believes that you should be economically strong first before you talk about it, and I have no dispute about it. I only wish that he had taken over the education, the shift in education at a much earlier stage, like the way probably others do. Like when communists come to power, the first thing they take over is education, right? Even the AAP government in Delhi, they have taken over education and taken a control over it. Congress had a hold over it for all these years, right? The government which came in 2014, BJP, did not take hold of it. Maybe they were too defensive and scared of being attacked. That is why they did not. But I wish that they had done this, and I wish they do it now sooner than later.
Yeah, but this again, I want to pin you down on 2014. Why, why do you think this has happened? Is it because of Mr. Modi's background? Is it does it lie in the way he has, his entire training has been? I'm not just talking of RSS, but the kind of socio-economic background that he comes from, and it's like we have a word called Lutyens Delhi, or the
I'm aware
Chor
of that.
Bagh, or what
Khan Market.
Khan Market
Khan
gang.
Market gang,
So
yeah.
he is one who's just miles and miles away from
from
that kind
that.
of a thing. I wouldn't. Probably Bajpayee ji was not that far away from that.
No, he
He
wasn't.
wasn't. So this, can we explore this a little? That is it somewhere which is causing this? It's not. I don't know. It's not Mr. Modi as such, but it is something that he brings with him, which has caused this. This is what I get as a feeling.
See, yeah, if you see Mr. Modi's personality, and I speak here as a psychologist, Mr. Modi's personality is completely different in many ways from the personalities of the older prime ministers, right?
Yeah.
First of all, he is the background he comes from, the kind of, he's not ambivalent, he's not secular, and he's very much assertive about his Hindu identity, right? And yes, I would say that a major part of it comes from his personality, his background, the way he comes from, the way he stands up for it, and also that there is a very deep question in history that when a leader comes about, is it the product of the times or the product of the leader, or the leader is the product of the times, right? I know that to the best of my knowledge, this question has not been resolved so far, right? He could be a product of the times, and the times have also, they complement each other, and they have brought it up. So I believe that it is both. It is also a product of the times. The Hindu society has been very much tired and fed up of the previous, governments, particularly some of the laws that they were trying to bring about. There was a deep sense of threat of extermination. This I started feeling in 2011-12 when they were feeling that. So that was partly the reason, partly the fact that who he was at Gujarat at that time. He went and fought a very lonely battle. He was demonized like anything, for this purpose, which only made him stronger. The Indian people saw in him someone who's a savior, and the two, I think, just clicked together. He came as a savior in 2014, and that way he was both a product of the times, and the times are also being shaped by him. And today, I think the biggest thing for Hindus is the threat of extermination. The Hindus are in a survival mode right now. They have been in a denial mode so far, and they have understood that they were in a denial mode because they had to survive, and they do not want to continue like that anymore.
Yeah, but there's a large section of Hindus, at least the influential Hindus, who are part of this secular liberal politics,
Yeah.
and they get a lot of support from.
They were the previous generation.
You don't think they are still there, very
They
strong,
are, because our education system has not changed
and that is a major threat, isn't it, to
very
this shift which
much.
is happening. So
Sure.
now my question to you is how you, no, now this is not as a psychologist so much, but how do you see this unfolding? Because at one level you say that there's a major shift which has happened since 2014, and I tend to absolutely agree with that. But on the other hand, I find this whole, the major forces working against it, and they're going all out now. And they're also getting support, let's say, from, I mean, it's not a secret anymore, from the West, whether it is BBC or it's New York Times or it is
Washington Post.
the democratic system in the US as well as in England, and perhaps also China. I mean, in
Not
a very,
perhaps,
very
I believe.
covert manner. So, are we able, I mean, this is very crucial. Which side can it, there are chances that they can reverse this shift which is
Very
happening and we
difficult.
go back?
No, I don't think that it'll get reversed right now. I think it's in motion at the moment, and I think that it is unfolding itself at a much faster pace than for it to be stopped or reversed or taken it back to extinction. I don't think so. I think there is a sense of deep distrust in the people towards what they have been told, what they have been taught, and they are very much in tune with that. They are aware that, so there is that sense of distrust in the people. You cannot stop anymore by covering it up, by putting a lid over it, but it is something that you have to face it directly. That's why probably you see all the opposition leaders right now showing also their Hindu heritage. Tell me a single time in India's history when opposition leaders or any, or even the leaders from the main political party showed their religious heritage, the Hindu heritage, so openly. It is happening right now because they realize that it's an irreversible process. It is not going. It is not going to change right now. That's what I am, something very firm. I mean, I firmly believe that.
So this new trend which is coming, I mean, this tectonic shift that you spoke of,
Tectonic, yeah.
tectonic, yeah. This
It's become a movement.
th- this is this is the process towards healing, right?
Yes, it is a process towards healing.
Healing. And in that, I mean, we can point out a few things like Ram Janmabhoomi is one of the things.
Healing is to going towards the truth is a healing process. A healing process is not something that you can ever go by going against the truth, by going against what has been the reality, right? I'm reminded of that famous example by Martin Luther King when he wanted to take out a rally in a city, and the police officer came and said, everything has been fine in the city, why do you want to disturb the peace? And he said, peace is not the absence of justice. Right.
Right.
So, peace is not the absence of justice, and anything that takes us towards truth is healing. There is a myth that, healing is something where you go away from truth. No. Going towards truth, realizing that how painful it has been, is part of the healing process only, of reconciliation process. And reconciliation is not with the other, reconciliation with yourself. So it is both with
your
self,
past.
with my past, with myself, with what I have grown up, with the fact that I have been betrayed,
Right.
right? So I feel very angry with the way I was taught something which was so wrong, so false, whether it was the Aryan invasion or whether the fact who gave us freedom, right? I need to reconcile with myself, with the people who taught me, and forgive some of them for the fact that they were doing only what they were told. We were playing a role, but it is important to change that. So that healing and reconciliation is a process which also makes us morally, spiritually strong in order to face the truth. That is what has happened with some other societies. It has happened, I would say, with Jews. I know that to some extent it has happened with Germans, with Australians, right, who have dealt with the crimes done by their ancestor, or what they have, or what the painful things they have faced in the past, and they have moved through that to become who they are today. Yeah.
So that means I'm very happy that what you are seeing it as a there's a great hope.
Oh yes,
You
I
feel
do.
that we are in the process of
Oh
healing,
yes.
and but how long is this going to continue before it settles down?
I think it will continue for a long, long time, right? And I don't think it is even, I think we should not look at the process of settling down or settling up. It will cause a lot of turmoil. Coming to your past, introspecting it, seeing what happened is not easy, right? Introspection can be a very depressing thing. But introspection is liberating,
It
right?
is a must.
It is a must, because without understanding what really happened, you cannot change. So I do believe that we are in the process and it is something that is happening. And I'm not bothered about settling down or settling up because that's a kind of a fear. How far do we go? No, let's face that. Let us, for example, take accountability for what happened, right? I tell Kashmiri Pundits that you need to tell Kashmiri Muslims that they, in fact, encouraged the militants, the others to run away, right? They feel very scared, right? I said, no, they did that, isn't it? Yes, they did that. So, until and unless you confront them for it, for what they did, they will not also take accountability. Expecting them to miraculously change and all that will not happen. You need to say that, hey, you were my neighbor. You were laughing when I left. You had kheer in your home when you saw my home being empty. You celebrated it, right? And I'm angry with you and I want to demand an answer as to why you did that to me, right? So the victims need to turn into survivors and demand accountability. That's what the Hindu society needs to do. So when that happens, and that happens in a powerful, significant way, we would see change happening. So the focus should not be on anything else, but telling the world what happened, telling the world that this is what we went through, this has been our history, this has been our memory, and confronting the world with that. And then we will find that people fall in line, people say, hey, because you are accepting it, because you are saying it so powerfully, we also accept it. That is what happened with Jews. You know that they were Holocaust deniers and they existed. The Jews silenced them. They had to, for example, Deborah Lipstadt, the professor who fought for the truth that concentration camp actually existed. David Irvine, the British historian, he made a case saying that there were no Holocaust did not take place. There were no incinerators. There was nothing like that. It's all a made-up story by Jews. She went and painstakingly proved that no, it happened, it existed. That kind of painstaking research, that kind of painstaking support is necessary for Hindus to also come up and bring it up, right? So once when we do that ourselves, then the world will take us seriously.
But we are in the process, we
Oh,
are a
yes.
democratic country, and I find that today the entire opposition, and I'm not talking in terms of pro-Modi or anti-Modi kind of
Sure.
a thing, I'm just talking in the context of what we have been discussing. Sometimes one fears that, of course, after Mr. Modi has come into power in 2014, certain processes have taken place and certain things are happening and they are major happenings. And this is all
It was
part.
an earthquake.
Huh.
I
So,
believe
but
it was nothing less than that.
will it continue? I mean, in the sense, if 2024, all forces are aligned against him, and
I don't think they may be aligned against him, but I don't think that collectively they are a force who will be able to, bring about a
this is
difference.
too big a shift
This
which is
is too
happening.
big a tectonic shift. I mean, the whole of India, uh, a large part of India, that's what I mean by whole, by and large, will again go and, vote for Mr. Modi. That's what my firm belief is.
So, all the best to you, and I'm very
Thank
happy
you.
with this interview. I hope the listeners also find it very interesting, as they enjoy it as much as I did. Very enlightening. So, thank you, Dr. Mitra.
Thank you.
मुझे लगता है आपने भी इसको इतना ही रुचि लेकर सुना होगा और आपको भी इतना ही एनलाइटनिंग लगा होगा जितना मुझे लगा इंटरव्यू करते वक्त डॉक्टर मित्रा को। तो मैं उनको धन्यवाद देता हूं और आपसे निवेदन है कि आप इस चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें, इसको लाइक करें और इसको हमको इनकरेज करें। धन्यवाद।